Alright, so this is the brand new Garmin Enduro 3. So this is Garmin's newest battery life king, taking aspects of both their new Fenix 8 as well as their Fenix 7X Pro and putting it into a lighter case along with some pretty incredible battery life. It's basically for all of you out there who want nearly every feature that Garmin has to offer in an outdoor focused sports watch, but also wants the longest battery life available for a watch with these kinds of features. It still has a sapphire lens, it has a titanium bezel, it has solar charging, it has a flashlight, it has maps, it also comes with their 5th generation heart rate sensor, all while having longer battery life. So should you spring for the Fenix 8 Solar or save your money and get this? Well, we'll definitely be talking about that in this video. So Garmin's Enduro series line of sports watches was introduced a few years back, taking a Fenix sports watch and modifying it to get as much battery life as possible. Their Fenix line of watches already get really good battery life, but the Enduros go kind of far beyond that and are aimed at that ultra endurance athlete that doesn't just need days of battery life for recording an outdoor activity, but weeks if you really need it. Actually, they even have a mode where you could get theoretically indefinite battery life. Now, to get these longer battery life numbers though, there's changes they needed to make. So this isn't just a Fenix 8 Solar with a larger battery, and I'll be getting into all the big and small differences between this and a Fenix 8 Solar in this video. But along with that, I'll also be talking about all the upgrades from the Enduro 2 for those of you who are interested in upgrading from that watch. But just like all my other reviews, this isn't just going over specs. I've been doing real-world testing with the Enduro 3 over the last couple weeks, putting it through all the paces for all sorts of adventures like running, to cycling, to hiking, testing GPS accuracy, heart rate accuracy, navigation features, and of course, battery life. And if you do find the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button down below. So with the Enduro 3, so this is kind of a combination of both a Fenix 7X Pro and a Fenix 8 Solar, where the hardware is kind of a mashup. So it has the new, more efficient solar technology that comes on their Fenix 8 Solar, actually even more efficient, and it also comes with their 5th generation heart rate sensor. But then they put that all into a lighter weight package using a resin unibody versus the Fenix 8 Solar, which has more metal in the construction. It still has a titanium bezel though, as well as a sapphire lens, so there's not really going to be any worries in terms of durability. It just ditches some of the metal on the back to make it lighter. And this is one of the big differences between the Enduro 2 and the Enduro 3, by the way, is that they use metal on the back of the Enduro 2, but they wanted to shave a little bit more weight with the Enduro 3, so they went with resin. And then a couple other hardware differences with the Enduro 3 is that it doesn't come with a new speaker and microphone of the Fenix 8. It also doesn't come with the leak-proof buttons, which also allow the Fenix 8 to be dive capable. And it also doesn't come with a sensor guard for the barometer and microphone, although it does still have kind of this little button guard on the start button, just like the Enduro 2, although a little bit more streamlined. One kind of random thing I'd say about the buttons though is that I do tend to prefer the buttons on the Enduro 3 versus the Fenix 8. They actually have a more positive click to them since they're not using an inductive sensor like on the Fenix 8. Oh, and by the way, just because they say that the buttons are leak proof on the Fenix 8, there's still no worries about water resistance on the Enduro 3. In fact, it still has the same 10 ATM water resistance rating as the Fenix 8, as well as the previous generation Enduro 2. And then when it comes to wearability, so the Enduro 3 has a 51mm case, but it is just slightly thicker than their 51mm Fenix 8, as well as the Enduro 2, but it is just a small difference. So this is on the larger end of things when it comes to a sports watch, but that larger case does allow them to cram an even bigger battery in there. But even though this is on the larger end of things, it's actually surprisingly comfortable to wear for a couple reasons. So first off is because of that lighter case where it's just 57 grams without the band versus the 51mm Fenix 8 Solar, which is 67 grams. Now 10 grams may not seem like all that much, but that's actually around a 15% weight reduction. And along with the UltraFit band, it really does make a difference in terms of wearability. And the UltraFit band, by the way, is my go-to band. In fact, that's actually what I switched out from the stock band on the Fenix 8 AMOLED when I was testing that. It's just the most comfortable band I found, where it's just this nice stretchy nylon band. It does stay a little bit wet after a shower or a swim, but it usually dries out in like 10 to 15 minutes. But another advantage of the UltraFit band is that it keeps it secure on the wrist, which isn't just good for comfort, but it also can lead to better heart rate accuracy. And more details on that here in just one bit. Now, when it comes to battery life, now that's really what the Enduro 3 is all about. And it's not just about the huge battery that they crammed inside. It's also about the solar charging. And with the Enduro 3, they've included the more efficient solar charging that was introduced with their Fenix 8 Solar, but they took it one step further by increasing the size of the solar panel that surrounds the display, where it has 120% more surface area. And they're able to accomplish this by actually having a thinner bezel than the Enduro 2. And then one more change is that the panel itself is actually substantially darker than before, so it blends into the rest of the case, so it's a bit more seamless looking. Another change with the solar technology though is that they've actually gone away from the translucent solar panel that was on top of the display on the previous Enduro 2, and the reason they did this is to have better readability and clarity, as that solar layer before reduced the clarity just a bit, and I have found it to make a difference in some situations. There definitely can be a lot more contrast where the blacks are actually black and the whites are a lot brighter than before. I can't necessarily say it's like a night and day difference, difference, but it is noticeable. And comparing it side by side with the Enduro 2, the Enduro 2 just looks a little bit more cloudy now. But what does make a difference though, in terms of the looks at least, is that solar ring being black and not that kind of shade of dark red. Anyhow, back to battery life. So the battery life claims are kind of nuts on the Enduro 3, just like the previous generation, but it does take it up a notch almost across the board with a few exceptions here or there without solar. However, the battery life claims with solar are far better than previous generation, doubling the battery life claims in some cases and also offering unlimited battery life in some configurations. Now, for how this actually play out in the real world though, so I've got a few examples for you here in both cloudy conditions as well as really sunny conditions, as well as with and without navigation, which can make a difference. All right, so for the first example here, I was using their Sat IQ mode, which automatically switches between modes based on the quality of the satellite signal. And I was just like recording my ride, and I wasn't using navigation, and it was super sunny outside. And it used a hilariously low 0.44% per hour, meaning that I could have potentially recorded a 225-hour long activity. Now, without solar though, so this ride was a little bit cloudier and it used a bit more. But so on this ride here, I actually forced it into that mode versus Sat IQ. And this was also a pretty sunny ride. And it was basically right in between their claims of sun or no sun. Now, when you start to use navigation though, this is where it does take a hit on battery life. So on this hike, I was using the auto select mode, and I was also using a route for navigation, but I actually had it on the Climb Pro page most of the time. But for kind of the worst case scenario of using their multi-band mode and then also having on the map page where it has to redraw the map page constantly, this will be the most taxing situation. Still, with the worst case scenario of 60 hours and the best case scenario of being well over 200 hours, I mean, it's still pretty astounding, but we can see how different variables can make a difference. And by the way, even though I forced it into the GPS only mode as well as the multi-band mode in a couple of my tests, I'd highly encourage you to just use the auto select or Sat IQ mode. It's actually just what I use on a personal basis, where I find it strikes the best balance of accuracy and battery life. The Enduro 3 also comes with the same updated user interface that comes with the Fenix 8, and this is their new user interface standard moving forward with new watches, and it's mainly about reorganizing a few aspects of the interface. So the first thing is their new notification center, which you can access by pressing the up button from the watch face, where before, pressing the up button would just get you to the bottom of all your widgets. But don't worry, this is totally optional and you can turn this off to get back to the traditional behavior of just looping through all your widgets with either the up or down button from the watch face. And the start button also gets some pretty significant changes too. So it's now separated out into two portions where you have your activity profiles up top and then apps and other functions down below. For the activity profiles, there's two ways that you can have this set up. You can have it so you have a folder of all your activity profiles that you have saved, but now you can actually pin a few activities to the start screen to give you quicker access to the most commonly used activities. Additionally, they've also made it so you can quickly use an activity profile that you may not want to have saved to your activities list. So now you can just keep on scrolling down to find, let's say, something like ice skating, and then just start the activity without necessarily having to save it to your profile list. And then activity profiles themselves also have some changes with their new stages and lanes concept. So now when you go to start an activity, the start screen has been revamped to now show functions for that particular activity profile right below the actual start page, like any training functions like workouts. There's navigation features for outdoor workouts, settings for the activity profile, as well as accessing watch settings. And then if you swipe to the right, here's all the data pages for that particular activity. And then if you swipe again, there's a music widget, and then you can just swipe left to go back. I don't necessarily find myself using this all that much, but it is there if you need it. And it doesn't necessarily get in the way or anything like that either. And then another thing they've added to the UI is a new touch unlock feature. This is by far my new favorite feature on their new watches. So now instead of you just having to choose touchscreen or no touchscreen, you can now have it temporarily lock after around 5 seconds or so. And to unlock it, you just tap on the display and then swipe down. This way you can still have the touchscreen on when you want to use it, but it locks so there's no accidental swipes or taps when you're not actually interacting with the watch. Now shifting to some smartwatch related features. So the Enduro 3 can receive notifications for texts, calls, and apps. And this is for both Android phones as well as iPhones. There is a difference though in terms of replying to messages depending on which phone that you have, where if you're on an Android phone, you can reply to text with predefined responses, but if you're on an iPhone, you won't be able to reply. And the reason for this is that Apple locks down reply functionality just Apple Watches. Garmin definitely wants that kind of capability, of course. But with the Fenix 8 though, you actually can sort of reply to a message via Siri since it has the speaker and microphone and it can access your phone's voice assistant. So on the smartwatch side of things, this is going to be one of the bigger differences between the Enduro 3 and the Fenix 8, where the speaker and microphone extend the smartwatch capabilities. Do you need those features? Well, that totally depends on your needs, of course. Personally, I don't really take calls on my watch, so that feature doesn't necessarily make a difference to me, but I do find that I use the voice commands to set timers and alarms. But on the health side of things, the Enduro 3 is actually exactly the same as the new Fenix 8, where it has their 5th generation heart rate sensor that also does have ECG. It has blood oxygen saturation tracking, it has skin temperature tracking, it has sleep tracking, it can track your HRV during sleep, and then it also does have their advanced performance feedback like training status, a recovery advisor, as well as their training readiness feature, which pulls in multiple metrics to give you an indication of how primed or maybe not primed you are for training. All those aspects are the same as the Fenix 8, and the big upgrade, by the way, from the previous generation Enduro 2 is the 4th generation sensor on that watch versus the 5th generation sensor on the Enduro 3 with ECG and skin temperature tracking. Now, for sport profiles, this is where it differs just slightly from the Fenix 8. So the Enduro 3 can track basically every sport under the sun. Get it? Sun? But you've got everything from standard running to trail running to ultra running, tons of different cycling profiles. There's tons of outdoor recreation profiles, including stuff for winter sports and water sports. There's plenty of gym profiles. The list kind of goes on and on. However, the big difference is that the Enduro 3 doesn't have a scuba diving profile or the apnea diving profile, since it doesn't have the upgraded leak-proof buttons of the Fenix 8. Again, they're just marketing those buttons as leak-proof, but the Enduro 3 is just fine in that department. Like, you can still do swimming both indoors as well as open water, and also does come with a snorkeling profile. It just doesn't come with the scuba dive or apnea diving. Now, when it comes to tracking outdoor activities, the Enduro 3 has the same multi-band satellite chipset as their Fenix 8, the Enduro 2, as well as many of other Garmin sports watches. And in terms of accuracy, for the total distances, it was a solid performer here, both for rides as well as runs. Good stuff, and the elevation gain also looked good as well. Now, when it comes to the finer detail of the actual GPS tracks though, so like on this ride, it was looking really solid in these super curvy sections of road on the coast. And this was an out and back, by the way, which is why you see tracks on both sides of the road. Over here though, I did notice something kind of interesting where the Enduro 3 did take this corner a little bit wide. A little bit strange, but nothing crazy by any means. Now, right here at the actual turnaround point where I went around a roundabout, everything was looking great. It was a little bit off on this faster section of curves coming back into town, but certainly no big misses or anything like that. And then on this ride here, as we ascended, things were looking really good. Now, right here is where we actually went through a tunnel, and it's always interesting to see how quickly a device can actually get a lock back onto satellites, and the Enduro 3 was really good. And then for the rest of the ride, I'll just kind of pan through all of this just to show you, but it looks really good. Now, right here, as we were descending on some tighter curves, I'd say that I may have cut in on this corner just like a little bit, but I thought I'd just kind of point that out, but it's really, really minor. Now, for the hardest GPS test I probably did with the Enduro 3 though, so this was a run through the town of Tossal del Mar, and these were some really tight streets and alleys where satellite signals can actually get blocked, exactly what this kind of dual band satellite system technology was designed for, and the Enduro 3 did pretty well. It cut in on this corner right here just a little bit, and then it was ever so slightly off the street right here. And then right here, so this was actually an incredibly tight section where we can see that the Enduro 3 nailed it, where the Chorus Vertex 2S cut a little bit, and the Fenix 8 that I was wearing on my other wrist went a little bit wide. Anyhow, all those little things that I did point out are really incredibly minor in the whole scheme of things. I never saw any huge misses or anything like that, but I do like to provide as much detail as possible. Now, on the heart rate accuracy side of things, so this is going to be one of the big upgrades for the Enduro 2, where the Enduro 3 has their 5th generation heart rate sensor, and this sensor has performed well for me on all their other watches with the same sensor. However, larger watches actually have a slight disadvantage where they may move and bounce around on the wrist, leading to inaccuracy. So let's see how the Enduro 3 did. So let's go ahead and start with some indoor cycling, which is what I used as a baseline to get a gauge on heart rate accuracy. It's basically an easy activity for a heart rate sensor to get right, since there's not really any variables to deal with. You're basically static all the time, and there isn't stuff like arm movements or bumps on the road. So all heart rate sensors should get this right. And the Enduro 3 absolutely nailed it for both the steady state sections as well as the intervals. There was a spot right here at the beginning where it did have a blip or two, but other than that, that's basically exactly what I like to see. Now let's go ahead and check out some road and gravel riding, and here's where we start to encounter more variables like bumps and vibrations of the road, which can make the watch bounce around, leading to inaccuracies. So here's my first outside ride with it a couple weeks back, and that's incredibly solid. I can't really find a problem with this at all. However, then on this ride, not quite as good, where it was a bit shakier. Nothing too wild, but certainly not as good as that first test. However, then on this ride, this was nearly picture perfect. Like, this is absolutely phenomenal. A little blip right here, but that's really it. Oh, and then for one more example, it was again pretty much perfect. A small delay right here to pick back up on the rise in heart rate, but interestingly, that's the same delay from the optical arm heart rate sensor. And then for running, that's actually incredibly solid out of the Enduro 3. Actually somewhat surprising for a watch of this size. You can see that it's a couple seconds behind the other heart rate monitors on some of these peaks, but that's totally normal for an optical heart rate sensor. Overall, I'd call this a really good result for running with the Enduro 3. And then for weight training, this is basically one of the hardest types of workouts for wrist-based optical heart rate sensor to get right due to all the varying arm forward movement as well as gripping onto the dumbbells, which tenses your wrist, which again can lead to inaccuracies. So on this first session, you can see that I was actually quite good for the entire workout, except for these 3 sets of bicep curls right here. It was very good at the bench press at the beginning, the shoulder flies over here, as well as the high intensity intervals at the end, but it did have an issue with those bicep curls. Of course, I did want to go ahead and test this again to see if those results were repeatable. And then on this test, it's much better. A bit high on these first 2 sets of bench press, and it did read a little bit higher than the external straps on the bicep curls again, but other than that, this is actually quite good for weight training. And I actually also wanted to point out that even the arm-based optical heart rate sensors I was wearing had some hiccups on those same bicep curls as well as the shoulder flies. So that's where for weight training, if you do want the most accurate heart rate, I'd recommend a chest heart rate strap. Every workout will be a little bit different though, but I'd say overall it does a good job, but there may be occasions where the larger size could play a role in accuracy, but definitely make sure that your watch is snug and isn't bouncing around for the best accuracy. So the Enduro 3 is a solid performer, but the question is, should you get this over a Fenix 8 Solar? Well, first off, it's a full $300 cheaper, so if you're on a budget but still want nearly all the features along with some incredible battery life, that's kind of hard to pass up. The differences really come down to that speaker and microphone as well as the dive features, and I really wouldn't worry about durability by the way with the leak-proof buttons on the Fenix 8. The Enduro 3 is just going to be fine. However, the last thing to consider is going to be size, where the Enduro 3 only comes in the 51mm option, where the Fenix 7 Solar comes in both a 51mm option as well as a 47mm option, and both of those still do get really good battery life. The other question for some of you out there is, should you upgrade from the Enduro 2? And that's, I think, probably a harder call, where that's already a super capable watch. The main difference is that 5th generation heart rate sensor on the Enduro 3, which I have found to be more accurate than the 4th generation sensor on the Enduro 2. And that sensor also does allow for ECG as well as the skin temperature tracking. I don't necessarily think that the new user interface is a super compelling reason to upgrade though, but maybe that does make a difference to you. I'd basically say that if you're not getting as accurate results on heart rate on the Enduro 2 as you'd like, maybe look at the Enduro 3, but if you do wear an external heart rate strap, that's certainly tougher to justify. What is interesting though is that the Enduro 3 is actually $100 cheaper than the Enduro 2 when it first came out. And last question, should you get an Enduro 3 or a Fenix 8 AMOLED? That's a bit more interesting question and a longer discussion that I'll get to in a follow-up video, but make sure to subscribe to get a notification when that video comes out. But in the meantime, if you did find the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button. Go have fun out there, and we will see you in the next video.